12 days into this war, and Iran's strategy ever clearer: hit the oil industry, hit the world economy. Oman says drones struck one of its coastal depots. It followed reported projectile strikes on 3 commercial vessels near the crucial Strait of Hormuz. With reports Iran had placed about a dozen mines in its waters, Iran threatening to take oil to $200 a barrel.
Any vessel whose cargo or oil shipment is destined for the United States, the Zionist regime, or their hostile partners will be considered a legitimate target.
Overnight, the US said it sank 16 Iranian ships, among them mine layers. But it's another alleged US strike from day one of this war, attracting ever more scrutiny. Iran says 175 people, most of them 7 to 12-year-old girls, were killed in the town of Minab, their elementary school adjoining a naval base destroyed. This image identified as a US Tomahawk cruise missile. Today, the New York Times reports that a preliminary US military inquiry has determined its forces were to blame. Donald Trump, who had erroneously said that Iran had Tomahawks, questioned today.
A new report says the military investigation has found it was the United States that struck the school.
I don't know about it.
In Tehran today, a mass funeral for senior commanders killed in US and Israeli strikes. Declarations of support for the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, still to make a public statement since succeeding his father. An Iranian official telling the Reuters news agency that he was lightly injured but continuing to operate.
All these people here will defend their homeland, their new leader, and the principles of their martyred imam to the last drop of their blood.
Opponents of the regime warn today that they'll be dealt with as enemies if they protest in the streets, as they watch the unrelenting bombing from their homes. We heard from one such voice today. We're calling her Mona, her words spoken by an actor.
Our only hope for continuing this life is that the Islamic Republic is destroyed. We have nothing left to lose. And if these people stay in charge, there will be nothing left of the country.
The US military saying it had struck 5,500 targets so far, that Iran's drone and missile attacks had dropped drastically as a result. Analysis by the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies suggests US forces are repeatedly striking Iranian underground missile bases known as missile cities, like this one in Kashan, rather than trying to penetrate dense rock, attacking tunnel entrances, sealing off missile stocks. And increasingly, there's a longer-term objective, hitting manufacturing infrastructure, like this solid missile propellant plant in Shahrud. Nearly every building on the site damaged or destroyed.
Every single Iranian missile base has been targeted and pretty effectively damaged, right? Many of them very extensively. It will take a very long time for the Iranian missile force to recover from this.
The US president himself telling the Axios news site that there was practically nothing left to hit inside Iran, repeating that the war would end soon. But at RAF Fairford, the US bombers were still being prepped for more missions.
Well, Donald Trump has again been describing the conflict as an excursion and claimed the US had hit 28 ships trying to plant mines. Let's get the latest from our US editor, Anushka Astana.
So I was standing on the South Lawn earlier listening to Donald Trump as he headed across to Marine One, and I would describe his mood as pretty bullish on all of this. He was talking again about Iran's behaviour over 47 years rather than specifically over recent years, and he was saying that the US had hit Iran harder than any country had been hit in history. He said he'd been having conversations with other leaders who had been praising how strong the US military had been. It's as if he wants to frame this whole thing around the idea of US military might. But Krish, as you've been saying, it looks like increasingly likely that the US military may have made one of the most devastating errors in recent decades, striking a school potentially and killing 175, most of them children. It's been interesting to hear Donald Trump's words, language change around that issue, originally suggesting, as you just heard, that it might have been Iran, that Tomahawks are generic missiles. In fact, they're sold by the US and they have not sold them to Iran, only to a few close allies. He has said at one point that he will live with what that report says, but he's going to have to do more than live with it. He's going to have to explain, and presumably consequences will be demanded.
And did he say anything about the oil crisis?
Yeah, he did. He was asked whether or not he'd spoken to oil chief executives, urging them to carry on sending their companies through the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump said he thinks that they should still be using it again to boast about that military prowess, about the number of ships that are on the bottom of the ocean. I was interested to hear that he was also hitting out once again at Spain, saying he was thinking about cutting off all trade with Spain. He did not mention the UK, and honestly, you could almost hear the sigh of relief from diplomats in the British embassy. They are tracking what Donald Trump says very closely, hoping that things have calmed down after he had a somewhat frosty call with Keir Starmer on the weekend.
Anushka Astana in Washington. Well, a little earlier, I was joined from New York by Richard Haass, who held senior positions in the US Defense and State Departments and was an advisor to Colin Powell in the lead up to the Iraq War. I asked him how the three main parties involved in this war might end it.
Well, that first assumes that the three parties all want to end it. At the moment, it's not clear any of them do, but I think it's a question more of when, not if, the United States does. Israel probably prefers for this to go on for some time and then some. Iran is the biggest question mark. The question is whether they're prepared to settle. If so, what kind of terms and so forth. But I think the hard truth is it takes one country to begin a war, and in this case, it's going to take three to end it.
Why would Iran want to carry on, given how much of a pasting they're taking?
Well, they've taken, as you call it, a pasting. So most of the damage, or a lot of the damage that could be done, has been done, certainly to their military forces. The real reason for them to carry on, besides domestic politics, to send the message that you can't attack them and get away with it scot-free, is to put pressure on the United States and others. So if there is a negotiation, that would affect the terms that the United States might be willing to agree to, be it a compromise on the nuclear program or conceivably easing some of the economic sanctions.
As the man who wrote about wars of necessity and wars of choice, the Americans and Israelis say it was a necessity. Do you argue it was a choice?
100% it was a choice. There was nothing new about the threat posed by Iran. Everything that administration figures in my country have said over the last, 10 days, they could have said 6 months ago. They didn't give negotiations a fair chance. If you contrast the patience and the willingness to compromise vis-a-vis Russia when it comes to Ukraine and what the United States demonstrated towards Iran, I would say it's night and day. I think for Israel, it's a different calculation. And indeed, that's an interesting point, that Israeli interests and American interests are not one and the same here.
And is it too soon for you to work out what this war was really about? Or is that coming into view?
It's a really interesting question. You know, when you say what it's about, I think there was a desire, certainly in Israel, to cut Iran down to size, particularly the ballistic missile force, not a doubt. I think in the United States, it was seen as something of an opportunity. I have a couple of rules when it comes to foreign policy. One is really understand the country before you go to war with it. And I think the United States violated or ignored that rule 20-odd years ago when we went to war with Iraq. And I think we once again ignored that rule in the case of Iran.
Donald Trump and his military leaders seem very confident that this has gone extraordinarily well militarily. What do you make of that?
I think it has. And that's what's interesting about this, that you can win a war militarily, yet not win it strategically and politically. It reminds me of some other wars of choice the United States has fought over the years, like Vietnam and so forth. And if you looked at a narrow accounting of how many casualties were on one side as opposed to the other, and the rest, you would have said, wow, we won. But when one looks at the pain we are going to have to absorb when it comes to inflation, the cost of energy, the cost of food because of fertilizer, it's not clear exactly how you tally up who's won, who's lost. So yes, we've won militarily, but to win militarily on the battlefield is not the same as winning a war.
Richard Haass, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, Western intelligence sources have claimed that Russia is sharing advanced drone tactics with Iran, according to a report by CNN, which says the information is helping the Iranian regime to launch its strikes against US military bases and Gulf nations. Moscow has previously denied claims that it's providing intelligence to Iran. The war in the Middle East offers Russia an opportunity to expand its influence diplomatically and economically, something unlikely to have escaped Vladimir Putin. Moscow has long maintained close ties with Iran. At the same time, Moscow is attempting to position itself as a global peacemaker, condemning what it calls an unprovoked act of armed aggression by the United States and Israel, and criticizing the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. Military cooperation between Russia and Iran has deepened in recent years, with Iran developing the Shahed drone technology that Russia has scaled up for mass production and battlefield use in Ukraine. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively out of business and disruptions to global oil supply, with producers including Iraq, Kuwait and the UAE cutting output, energy markets are in turmoil. Some may look to Russia to help offset the supply shocks. Putin has already signalled his readiness to supply Europe with the oil and gas it requires. European leaders warn that would be a mistake.
Some argue that we should abandon our long-term strategy and even go back to Russian fossil fuels. This would be a strategic blunder.
The irony is striking. More than 4 years after invading Ukraine, Russia is now accused of helping fuel another conflict, even as global attention shifts away from the war it began. Well, joining me now from Vienna is Russian diplomat Dmitry Polyansky, who is Russia's representative at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Thank you for joining us. Can you begin by just telling me what support and help is Russia giving Iran, if any?
As far as I know, judging from what my president said, answering these questions, Iran has not asked for any support, any help, and that was it.
But you are close allies, and you fought together before in Syria, notably. I mean, the question is, why not?
I don't know why Iranians are not asking for any help from us. I think they can defend themselves on their own, and they are showing that they are capable of doing it. I think everybody sees this. So you need to ask this question to Iranians, not to me.
And if there was a request, would Russia consider it?
You are a master of asking hypothetical questions. Are we here for that, or are we to discuss practical things?
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to get at the nature of the relationship between the two. But if you don't want to talk about that, then let's talk about practical things. In the United Nations, is Russia intending on blocking the Western-sponsored resolution condemning the violence?
Well, I think you should ask my colleagues at the United Nations about this, because I am dealing with the OSCE right now. It's the questions of European security and Europe's involvement in the war in Ukraine. That's my portfolio.
And where do you feel you sit at the moment, given European anxiety about where this war might spread? How are you able to reassure your opposite numbers?
Well, I wouldn't call it European anxiety. I think European anxiety is about getting at the negotiating table right now, and not about ending this war, because they are doing exactly the opposite thing that what they should have done if they really wanted this war to end. But in particular, since you are speaking from the UK, I think that one should mention this attack on Bryansk, which happened yesterday with the help of British Storm Shadow missiles. So Britain is directly involved in this attack, and this is very deplorable. We'll speak about this tomorrow at the OSCE.
So you think Europe is making a mistake by sending military assets to defend its allies?
I think Europe has made a number of mistakes or blunders, as Ursula von der Leyen has put it, one blunder after another, and not wanting to discuss with us the questions of European indivisible security was one of the blunders. Now I think Europe is behaving like the crew at the Titanic, seeing that there is an iceberg in front of it and just playing music and understanding that they don't want to change the course.
And how much is Russia benefiting from this war, both in terms of the oil price and the using up of air defense systems that might otherwise be going to Ukraine?
I don't think it's a right framing of this question of benefiting from war. Nobody's benefiting from this war in Russia. On the other side, Europe is considerably benefiting from the war in Ukraine because of selling arms and weapons, because of Ukraine being a testing field for this. So this is clear, but I don't know what you are claiming about Russia benefiting from this war, frankly.
Well, we're facing an oil crisis because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and there is growing speculation that Donald Trump in particular would like to change the rules on sanctions around Russian oil. Is that what you're hoping for, which would obviously benefit Russia as well as the rest of the world?
Well, I think that you are facing the oil crisis first and foremost, and the gas crisis potentially, as the consequences of your reckless decisions to do away without Russian cheap and reliable energy sources. I don't think that's the main reason of the oil crisis that it is now in Europe. I mean, the Iranian situation.
Ambassador, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Well, for the latest episode of The Forecast, I've also been speaking to the comedian and actor Omid Jalili about why he believes the Iranian regime cannot reform and why some Iranians say the war may be the only way to bring the regime down. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Kieran.
Cheers, Chris. Well, 400 million barrels of oil will be released from the emergency reserves of some of the world's largest economies, with the International Energy Agency saying the oil market is now facing challenges unprecedented in scale. Our economics reporter Neil MacDonald joins me now. So, Neil, how big is this and what's the plan behind it?
This is a dramatic move, Kieran. It involves 32 countries, including the UK, and it involves a third of their entire existing emergency stockpiles of oil. So 400 million barrels are going to be released, as you said. Now, that is more than double the amount that was released back in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. This is the largest release of oil the IEA has ever been involved in. The plan, well, 20 million barrels of oil normally go through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, right now, that's basically zero. So replace the oil, reassure the markets and get the prices down. The problem is that, of course, the 20 million, the 400 million that's being released is only about 20 days of the amount that normally be coming through the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think anyone really believes that this can replace the need to get the tankers moving again. And in fact, the price of oil actually went up slightly when this move was announced.
And here in the UK, Neil, there are signs that the government might take some action on fuel duties?
Yeah, I mean, fuel duties are currently frozen, but they are due to go up this autumn by a penny. Now, given the fact the price of petrol has gone up by about 7 pence a litre over the last 10 days, can any government actually push that additional increase through? The Conservatives are saying, no, just forget it. Today, the Prime Minister said that the situation was under review. The problem is that changing that policy is not cost-free. If they get rid of the 1p increase they're planning for the 1st of September, that will lead to £400 million lost in tax revenues. The 2p increase they're planning for December, that would cost them 900 million, and it's the same again next March. The 2p increase would cost them another 900 million. So like £2 billion to entirely replace that policy. I think the Treasury want to get across the idea that they will protect consumers, but they just think it's far too early in this crisis to decide where things are going to land, particularly given how endlessly fluctuating the price of oil is at the moment.
OK, thanks, Neil.
For passengers who've made it back from the Gulf this past week, relief. With airspace closing as soon as it opens and drones hitting airports in Dubai and Kuwait, those stuck in the Middle East have been the focus of government repatriation efforts. and the most critical to get home. But nearly 2 weeks into America and Israel's war on Iran, a rapidly growing number have found themselves stranded in Asia, their insurance voided by war, their airlines leaving them in the lurch and not knowing when they'll get back.
I was meant to fly home on the 2nd of March.
Charlotte and her father Jerry's flights home from Sri Lanka were cancelled, and they're desperately trying to get their airline to put them on another.
We're sending an email every day to the email we've been given, and we're not getting a response. We try the phone line, but it doesn't ring through. So there's this like loop, and we've been going through each stage every day with no success.
I will lose, I don't know, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 probably. I'll lose my salary for March.
Sandwiched between a war zone to both the north and now the south, a huge proportion of the world's air traffic is being forced through a narrow air corridor over Georgia and Azerbaijan. And with millions of people travelling through Gulf hubs each year on the way to Europe from Asia, the bottleneck is widening.
Today it looked like we were going to get a flight with Turkish Airlines, and then when we got to book, it basically refreshed the page and said all the flights were full. And the flights that are coming up are basically minimum of £2,000 each.
The volume of passengers we're talking about, these 3 airports, the Gulf hubs, account for typically 500,000 people a day, usually. So that's an enormous number of people in limbo that the airlines have to try to sort out, not least how do you get those people into the country? They weren't supposed to be in there in terms of passports and visas. Where do you accommodate them while they're waiting to find a way out, as we've now seen with repatriation flights? It's an enormous headache. I would say it's a microcosm of what was happening to all airlines at the beginning of COVID as airspace shut down.
I'm just glad that I'm back home safe, because I know a lot of people are still stuck and can't get back.
Ellie Houghton did manage to get home to Manchester from Japan, landing this morning.
And so I flew from Tokyo to Houston to Montreal, Montreal to Brussels, Brussels to Manchester, with a total of 32 hours, including layovers, which was a lot cheaper. I think it was £700-ish, not including visas that I had to pay for, obviously, compared to flights that were £2,000, £3,000.
Several airlines have increased their fares, citing rises in the cost of jet fuel caused by surging oil prices. With no end to the war in sight, thousands still don't know how they'll get home or how much it'll cost.